Hi.
Ciao Anna, ciao Axel.
How are you?
Fine, and you?
Yeah, perfect.
Good.
Perfect.
Good to see you, and thanks for accepting the invitation. So it's really our pleasure.
Thanks for inviting us. We can see that it's also sunny in Italy now.
Yes,
Finally.
It's pretty good. And how is there?
Yes, also
sunny, but not so warm, but sunny.
Okay.
We take what we can get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're in Zurich.
Now we are in Lausanne today, so we are at a friend's place with a nice disco ball.
Yeah.
Yes. Shiny disco ball.
Indeed. Yeah.
You're having fun there.
It's not yet.
Hi everybody. Hello.
Ciao.
Hi guys.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So we wait formally 2 minutes and then we begin at 12:30. Ciao, Florian.
Hello. How are you?
Good with you?
Hi.
Nice meeting you all.
Likewise. And
I see you.
thanks a million for participating.
Yes, so Jane cannot join because I'm in Amsterdam and she's in New York. So
Okay, I see. So it's not too early. I was afraid that we woke you up for breakfast.
no, I picked these two dates because I'm in Europe till tomorrow, so I thought it made sense to do it now.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah. And Tom and Alberto, you are in Milano.
Yeah.
Looking forward to come to meet you there in your beautiful office.
Yeah, you should.
Okay.
And Luca and Steph, you are in Milano as well?
Yes, in Milan as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that bad. No, especially, I mean, these days it's pretty fantastic to be in Milano. It's sunny, it's green, very greeny outside, so it's
Also
beautiful.
inside.
Yeah, also inside.
It seems like you're in the Villa Necchi.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, thanks for that. You can would be fantastic, of course. Yeah. No, unfortunately, no. We are not broadcasting from Villa Necchi. But we can organize that maybe. Okay. And so no, I think we can begin. And I mean, we formally say thank you all for being with us today. So it's the second day of FakeAuthentic Life of the Others. And we have been very happy last week for the huge contribution of people. And so again, we thank you for your generosity because we know you are all very busy practicing architects. And it's such a pleasure to have you here with us. So today, in order, we will have VG13architects from Italy, from Milano. And then we will have MacIver-Ek Chevroulet from Switzerland, and then Florian Hindenburg will talk as a last. We begin with Tommaso and Alberto. They are a young practice in Milano. They both graduated in Mendrisio, and we met there. They also have something to do with the teaching in Mendrisio. Tommaso is teaching together with Walter Angonese. Their range of project goes from all over the scale. So they are really into much competitions, of course, as young practices. So there's no chance to go out for an aperitivo with them. They are always working, and they are also building as well. They are now becoming pretty famous, I have to say, with first publications, which are very interesting. And we thank you, Alberto and Tommaso, for their time as well. So we leave you the word as the first guest. So thanks a million.
So we share the screen.
Yes, please.
You should allow us to
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Okay, great. So for that, so thank you very much for the invitation. We are speaking today also as former participants of the first FakeAuthentic experience in Milano in 2019. Back then, in the frame of this very nice event, we were asked to design a lamp in a corridor. And since we are not really at ease, we're not really good in designing objects, we designed the space into this museum. So it was a structure that incidentally made light. So we reinterpreted and the lamp is still there at the museum to this day, and it was a very nice contribution. So back to today's topic, we were asked to talk about these four terms, and we always like, so we thank you for that. We always like to reflect on our work. We always like to think about what we do. So it's always a nice excuse to think a bit, to stop drawing and designing and think about something else. That's the theory of our discipline. So in 2019, as I said, we were asked to reflect on the themes of fake and authentic. So we asked ourselves back then, what is truly authentic and what is truly fake? So is that a question of philosophical matters or a dispute on values? Are the intention behind the creative act that defines both realms? And we also asked ourselves if beauty is only a privilege of authentic experiences. Because as we find out, counterfeiters in the realm of art, or in this case of architecture, share the same technical values and technical capacity than the authentic artists. So what is really, what does distinguish one to the other, since the aesthetic outcomes usually are the same? We believe that investigating the intentions is the key to define fake from authentic. The intention to create beauty is not enough to define an authentic gesture. So at that point, we ask ourselves, who cares if the outcome is the same? Who cares about intentions? And we answer that we as architects particularly care about intentions. We produce forms and figures derived from our own authentic values, usually. And that said, it requires consciousness, honesty and irreverence, rules and freedom, technical ability and imagination, novelty and history, and also authorship and creativity. The only authentic gesture we came to said is the one made in accordance with greater values. We constantly strive to express that in authentic acts, so our authentic values into authentic acts. It is obvious, of course, that we have to compromise sometimes, but we always try to never do such to the extent in which our values are no longer evident and visible. So on this third term, when we design when we think about things, we always try to make iconic buildings. Making an iconic building doesn't mean to produce a bizarre or extravagant monument. Icons in such are figures that have meaning in themselves. So they convey connection to our culture, to our myth, to our pantheon of ideas and connections to other fields. So working by icons, working by iconic significance means to imagine and carefully build spaces and buildings that can have an intrinsic value. And there, in that intrinsic value, we can find beauty and solidity. And the fact that these spaces will be able to interact to the inhabitants to the deepest level. because icons always have something that remains in us, since they work on our archetypal and archaic characters. So forgettable buildings, which nevertheless make iconic buildings appear as such, are for us of less interest, because usually they are something produced by mere necessity and doesn't need to carry meaning in themselves. We really thought about irony and the meaning for us of this idea of irony, and we began to understand that what we already said is not ironic, but it's in itself the irony of our work. Being architects in times of uncertainty, given that probably throughout history all architects has always worked in times of uncertainty, make us realize that what we do is rarely considered a necessity. Not really the object that we produce, which are buildings that are always needed by humans and by mankind, but it is always often considered unnecessary, the intellectual and cultural approach we want to impress to our architecture. So this is the irony of the architect's work. Investing yourself completely for something that usually it's not worth it. But at the end of the day, we all do it anyway, because we authentically believe in what we do. But in that, we don't need to worry, we think, or at least we do not worry. On the contrary, we should feel privileged in our voluntary exile, because in this exile that we can concentrate on the very dynamics of architecture. So this was the main frame of this. We don't have, how can I say, a consequential link to these ideas, but we think that all these thoughts can be, for some extent, explained into a proposal, a small competition we lost recently lost for a pavilion in Zurich, which for us was an authentic iconic gesture. So to answer the question of Luca and Stefania. And we titled it the große Form in kleinem Maßstab, which is the big form in the small scale. So this was the site in the middle, the former parking, which is in a park in Zurich, in between huge neoclassical buildings such as the ETH by Gottfried Semper, or the central building of the university by Karl Moser, and where you can see the sport field will be an extension of Herzog de Meuron of the UTA, and the hospital, which will be added by Christian Gantenbein. So at the time, we believed that in such context of big forms, of big urban forms, we should respond with a strong and decisive form, rather than with an ephemeral and temporary pavilion, capable of having a dialogue with pre-existing elements without having the claim of confronting them, and of course without that kind of irony of confronting to some late 1800 buildings. The requested surfaces were tight, and so were the budget, which forced us to apply this discourse on big forms to the small scale. So the project strives to answer convincingly to this problem of the big scale, of the big form at the small scale, which probably wasn't convincing enough. But the typology we chose to answer the theme was freely derived from the neoclassical folie, which are these temples in classical parks. The interest in these kind of objects lies in their intrinsic idiosyncrasy and their capacity of evoking archetypal architectures miraculously preserved and stripped of their original functions. So the project is conceived as a tempietto precisely located at the corner store of the park. And under one big roof supported by tall timber pillars and capitals is defined a covered yet very open space towards the park. So a kind of seamless transition happens between the space and between the temple roof and the spaces covered by foliage of the surrounding park. And the second element, supported by the same structure, so the grid of pillars, is a second roof that covers the room and the functional spaces. This second element closes the space toward the street, giving at the same time a door to the park and acting as a transition between neoclassical forms and the vegetal landscape of the park. Thanks. We are done.
Thank you, guys. It has been really interesting also to see those topics reflected in your work. You had done a really good job. Thank you a lot. And we're looking forward to meet you personally very soon.
We wait you.
Okay, so we go on. Anna and Axel. Hi.
Yes, hello.
We'll shortly introduce you. And Anna and Axel met as students in Copenhagen and together discovered a passion for architecture. They both explored the teaching experience, Anna at ETH and Axel at EPFL. And coming throughout their work, you will be amazed by their unconventional character of the projects. These choices are so successful that why not, it wouldn't be bad if they became the new convention for us. So, now you can speak.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this introduction. So let's share the screen, hoping that it's gonna work. Oh. Is it all right? You see the presentation?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect, perfect. Trying to make us disappear from the screen, yes. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Stefan and Luca, for inviting us to this series of lecture. We are honored to be along this list of people, also with VG13 and Soil today. Thanks again, first of all, VG13 for this nice lecture. We hope to do as well. And we're looking forward for Soil to listen also at your talk after. So FakeAuthentic, it's also a good occasion that you give us to think about this topic and to also phrase it, because I think these are themes that are often in our mind, but that we don't really take the time to actually verbalize them and to think about them. And we took this kind of confrontation of words, fake and authentic, split with this dash in a kind of literal way, and kind of put a collection of images from our projects, but also of images that we gathered along the way of traveling or just discovering things together, and started to make diptychs, and to really, the same way that fake and authentic are laying next to one another, to start to put them next to one another, overlap them, and kind of see what happens. So a kind of exploration, one might say. And sometimes things came out, and so that's what we wanted to share with you. Yes, this first one. To the Basilica San Petronio in Bologna. Well, what could be more authentic than an Italian church? We thought maybe a Swiss chalet, but we've got to be honest, a Swiss chalet is not as impressive as an Italian church, so we will stick to the Italian church. And I remember when we were at school that we would be listening for hours in classes of history of architecture about the composition of these facades, the role that the pillar has with the architrave, the hierarchy of all the elements. And then you see this basilica and you realize that not even one word was said about the actual building that is laying behind this layer of a few centimeters of stones. This brick facade where the bricks actually change their composition to take bigger spans, which has holes ready to cover to hold the stones that will come. I guess today these holes are certainly inhabited by pigeons or all the beautiful birds that you have in Italy. And somehow it made us it made us think about the notion of authenticity in such a building. And then next to it, you see this builder doing the most banal thing that happens today in a construction site, because I think half of the construction material is about insulating a building. And somehow this worker is doing exactly the same job than they were doing in the Renaissance. And he becomes a kind of uncanny Palladio, putting his plates of Austrotherm on top of one another. And we're even thinking maybe at least this worker is doing something that has to do with energy efficiency. I guess it's quite obvious that to reach a sustainable future by putting foam on all the buildings in the world seems a bit contradictory, but let's say it has something to do with energy. As this church on the side, this basilica is actually, the whole facade is mostly about representation. So not only these words start to merge, but you could even start to think maybe that you could reverse them. And in our practice, and I think all of our practice, we think that we search for authenticity, but then we started to think, what if the history of architecture would be actually about the history of faking? And we thought that we were being a bit cynical maybe, but at the same time we're thinking that maybe it's not so much about being cynical, but it's also about finding or seeking a freedom and trying to escape from this weight of having to reach a kind of authenticity, but actually joyfully continuing this line, this history of faking and of wrapping things around other things. And this leads us to a project that we are working on now, which is called Scumfidus. It means marshmallows in English. And it's a furniture series that we do for the Fashion Week of Copenhagen with this brand Tableau. You should check it out. They're very interesting. And we will not show you the project, but just this happy accident, as Bob Ross would phrase it, on the right. So we're quite fascinated, as I guess you already understood, by this material of foam. I mean, not only it's the most used material, I think, nowadays on construction sites, but it's also one of the only material that today you can afford as a massive material. If you work with stones, it's only like a few centimeters plate, or with wood, it's often furnished wood. But foam is inherently a massive material, and its qualities because it is massive. So we started to treat foam as a kind of noble material, and to play with its actual almost endless formal abilities. And so this one is a prototype that we're making for a chaise longue. I think it's a lounge chair. I think we had lunch, and then we came back after lunch, and I think without knowing it, we had reached the tipping point, or I had reached the tipping point of my weight. And when I sat down again on the chair, it broke in half. And somehow when we were doing this research, and we found this picture that we took in Lebanon in Tur 2 years ago, and that we saw these massive columns. This time it's not about the Renaissance cladding, but it's really about the mass of the column that had broken, and that we saw these two images next to one another of these two materials. One is broken because it has 2,000 years, and it has had 2,000 years of weathering, of wars, and it's relating to the Phoenician culture. And the other one broke just because of a bit of overweight. I don't know, we're quite happy, and I don't know what we can do with it, but we thought it was kind of a nice cornerstone in this project.
Here we also see two very different contexts again, but somehow these very similar situations of this clash between the fake and the authentic. Here we also have on the right Spreitenbach, which is a small village in Switzerland, in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. We were asked to make a study about what would be the future of this village. And one of the the important features is that in the 70s, just next to this small village, they built a giant shopping mall, and still today is the biggest shopping mall in Switzerland. And over the years, it was extended and extended until eventually the shopping mall was even bigger than the village itself. And so the shopping mall was really the most important thing. And if you would ask somebody about Spreitenbach, they know the mall, but they don't know the village. They even don't know that it exists sometimes. And the project is sort of an idea of like a hypothetical provocation of what is more authentic and what is more fake in these two situations. Because at the moment, the mall is actually the authentic, or the sort of the real gathering place where people would go to meet. So there's a fountain inside of the mall, which really replicates the fountain that's in the existing village. And that's the place where people would go meet with friends, get dressed up. And so this original village square in the old village has completely lost its meaning. It's been completely usurped by the mall itself. So the project proposes to extend the mall on top of the existing village, and to really completely englobe the village. And so that this old village square with a fountain becomes now in the mall. So we sort of remove the village square. We find it interesting that then the mall becomes like these houses, these old farmhouses become like a decor for the mall, this backdrop for the shops. And suddenly this very authentic village becomes really fake, and the fake mall starts to become really authentic. And in the other image, it's from Oman, which is a country in a sort of mid-sized country in the Arabian Gulf, and it's a place where I grew up and spent part of my childhood. And we think it's also interesting to look, similarly to the example in Lebanon, to look with a sort of non-Western lens at some of these themes, especially fake authentic. And at the moment we're starting a Swiss-Omani collaboration between the two countries, because we meet really similar topics as in Switzerland, because the country is in very, very rapid development, as in many places in the Gulf. So most of the built stock has been built in the past 40 years. So things that, since everything goes so quickly over there, things become much more obvious. So sort of these slow and invisible processes become very visible. So what happens in Spreitenbach over maybe hundreds of years, here starts to happen in the space of 40 years. And we see these old houses that are made of earth being abandoned, and these new houses are being built very quickly. Here we see this sort of new build without its sort of under construction, without this final layer of the stucco and the paint. And we find really interesting this construction, which is between these very pragmatic bricks and these precast vernacular shapes. We like to see how there's sort of this adaptation of these universal building techniques, but also these vernacular forms which really come from the existing houses. And this mixture of these generic forms and vernacular shapes are a very interesting mix. And even though these new builds, they're seen as sort of being fake, in a way that they're also not so fake in their meaning. Their presence themselves could really question the presence of more traditional buildings, but in fact they sort of stay side by side and they influence each other equally. So the authenticity of one is somehow not questioned, they're sort of just developed fluidly. Here we have another sort of uncanny meeting of two very different situations. On the right, so we have one of them is clearly in the mountains. It's also in Oman, in the middle of nowhere, and another one is in a valley in Switzerland, in the countryside. This football pitch on the right that you see, this very surreal image, it has also quite an interesting backstory. It's in the Hajar Mountains in Oman, close to a village called Bilad Said, which is a very, very hard to reach village. There are no main roads. There's just dirt tracks leading up to this village. So you really have to want to go there to go there. It's very beautiful. And Audi, the car manufacturer, they wanted to make a commercial in the mountains. So with their latest car, so they built this football pitch up there in the middle of nowhere, just so that they could make their commercial. And I mean, it was really fake in the way that it was conceived, because it was really just made to be there for a couple of days. So they essentially made this commercial and then they left, and they left this football pitch where it was. And in the end, the locals have really appropriated this field as their own, and they use it really almost every day until sunset. And we find interesting this sort of this change in the meaning of something that was supposed to be something completely false that was implanted in this landscape starts to become something really appropriated and really authentic to the people there. But it still keeps its sort of strange, surreal quality in the mountains. The other is a project that we made with our close friends, Comte Meuvely, and it's a tool shed in a garden in the countryside. And this program is very, you could say, the most banal, but the way that it's made is sort of in a way very abnormal. Just like Audi makes this huge effort to build a football pitch in the mountains, we made a huge effort to make a garden shed more interesting. It just seems just as unseemly to place this this garden shed in such a remote garden, this sort of mirrored box with translucent walls, and it becomes almost like a jewelry box. And this translucency also starts to affect the way that the client places things inside the box. It somehow starts to be more of a scenography. And again, we start to also change the meaning. You know, this humble garden shed starts to become something more, and the client now wants to use it to smoke cigars because he thinks it's too beautiful to just stand in the garden. One of our final sort of meetings of two different things is one, we have these sort of two very different entrance follies in different contexts. And we stumbled upon this while we were preparing the lecture, and we in no way realized that this was such a good coincidence. It was the one on the right is another project that we made with our friends Comte Meuvely, and the one on the left is an entrance that we ran into on a walk around Kantab, a small village in Oman. So you can see that that the Swiss, they dream more about gold, and the Omanis, they're sort of dreaming about the green grass that they wish they had. Sort of difference in perspective, I guess. But in a way, on the right, it's this very light, very fragile object. It's just a sort of a folded brass sheet being held in place by two tension cables, and just gives shelter from the rain to enter into an old house. And in Kantab, it's an equally thin and fragile object, but it's this also very careful folding of this fake grass over the steps so that you avoid to get sand on your shoes when you enter into the house. And it's this very humble entrance, and you have this brick that's somehow holding it in place. We don't know if it's being glued or if it's just always there as a symbol. And we find quite a poetic moment of these two things being joined together without really meaning to. And sort of what we're trying to say, I guess, through the whole lecture is that we have this understanding now that fake and authentic are not really these two polar opposite terms, but that they always find themselves on a spectrum, sometimes moving closer to one another, sometimes being two things simultaneously or not being one or the other. And it really then gives us this freedom to experiment with this double meaning and to this ambiguity and to have fun with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a million for such a personal and clever intuition. So, I mean, we are amazed by the variety of presentations and by the talks that you bring on the table. So you go from chicken to football pitch somewhere in desert and gold and bricks. I mean, listening to you talking, it's kind of mental mapping, and I think it's very, very beautifully made. So again, thank you so much. And I have now the pleasure to introduce Florian Edinburgh from Soil. Soil, it's a practice in New York. It's based in New York City, and it's Jing Liu and Florian Edinburgh. So they started this in 2008, if I am correct. And the studio really deals with almost all the ranges and varieties of things you can do with architecture. So they are really into research. They are building quite a lot all over the world. They are building an office as well. I read that diversity and equality are two of the main features, let's say, of the office and of the people you have in the office. And I think there are beautiful descriptions of your way of practicing on your site. And I think it's very valuable. So check it out. As I said, I mean, they are all over the world, and they are also teaching in MIT, Harvard. They have been published very much. So I don't want to say too much, and I just thank you very much, Florian, for accepting the invitation. And so there you go. Thanks a million.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction, Luca and Steph. Thank you for inviting me, and very nice to meet you guys also, VG13 and what is it? How do I say it correctly? MacIver-Ek? Yeah.
MacIver-Ek.
Oh, MacIver. We don't know anymore where everybody is from, and that's exactly, I think, the interest. What was fun, and let me well, before I share my screen, thank you for indeed the clear instruction and sending Eric Lapierre's video. So I followed exactly what he did in preparing this. But interestingly enough, it made me also, so what I really enjoyed in this question, and you mentioned it already a little bit, it seemed a very sort of European topic to an extent, or something that indeed at this moment in the United States, where we both teach, the conversations are very different. And so it allowed me to really reflect on that, but also realizing that maybe some of that, the conversations that are happening here that have somewhat faded here, meaning in Europe, I'm now in Amsterdam, that have somewhat faded in the US to talk about indeed, say, inclusion, diversity, and social and environmental issues, sort of the joy that lies in thinking about the topics that you raised, you know, here, that are really about architecture and about design. I really enjoyed thinking about it. So let me share my screen. Yep. And it made me think, so fake, authentic, ironic, and iconic, in some way are obviously discussions that are about, say, modernism and postmodernism to an extent, right? Or honesty and sort of pretend. And obviously in the US, we learn to say fake it until you make it. So the idea that the fake is necessary before you can actually make it speaks a little bit to the idea of pretense and then construction. So I had to think a lot about the relationship between structure and facade. So maybe structure is authentic and facade is fake. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at five corners of buildings and think about how structure and facade come together, because maybe there it's where the reveal is between what is sort of honest and dishonest, fake, authentic, and what have you. So we'll be looking at five corners. And this one is I wanted to start with indeed a critique. This is a building by Diller Scafidio, the ICA in Boston, built in 2006. And so if we think about modernism, postmodernism, and then maybe deconstructivism, obviously in 1988, Deleuze wrote The Fold, right? And The Fold dealt with Leibniz's concept, right, of monads as folds of space, movement, and time. And Eisenman read that and immediately started to think that architecture should literally translate this idea of the fold into folded surfaces. So the surface building became sort of a moment. And obviously, you know the scheme of OMA in Cardiff or the Villa VPRO by MVRDV, but many architects started to try to have this continuous surface as a fold, as a motif, literally a translation of this Deleuzian concept into sort of a form. And I think it came to sort of a height during the I-Beam competition in New York. And I thought it would be nice to have some US examples in this discussion. That's why this one is in. But so I-Beam, maybe you guys remember 2001 was a competition where pretty much everybody folded their surfaces up into the building. And so ultimately, none of those projects were very successful in materializing, because in some way the fold cannot be structural, right? The fold is inherently weak, so to say. And so that's where the lack of authenticity, I think, comes, or the lack of honesty, so to say, within this idea. And I think this one is most particularly fake in a sense that this building is built literally as a series. And if you look at the construction drawings as well. It's basically a series of columns with a cantilevering box. But the fold here, as the continuation of the boardwalk that comes up, becomes sort of a viewing platform to the harbor, and then becomes the theater and folds and carries the gallery box, is in my mind particularly an unsuccessful execution of this idea of the fold. Specifically, as you see the structure and the column running straight through here, and I've visited this building when it opened in 2006. The side cladding of the fold was not yet clad on the building, so actually you saw straight floors, and only the metal cladding, produces here the fold. And on the interior, there's actually little sheetrock infills in the corners to make the fold continue on the inside. So for me, this was the fake as a disappointing, say, execution of this concept. And so if we go to authentic, and maybe the idea of structure and honesty, I wanted to share this project, which is sort of not well known, I believe, in Europe, but it is by IMP. It's one of the buildings IMP produced. It's Spelman Halls on the campus of Princeton. And last year we did a studio around this project and the idea of sort of reuse and transformation of this building. And what is most beautiful about, or say authentic or honest, maybe, I should not make judgments which one is more beautiful, but that this building had to be built very quickly in 1974 during the oil crisis. Princeton decided to admit females to their campus, and very quickly they needed to build a dorm for the female student body, and it had to be built at the height of the oil crisis. It was named after Laura Spelman, and she is actually the wife of J.D. Rockefeller, the person who started Standard Oil, which became Esso, one of the largest oil companies. And so in the midst of the oil crisis, speaking about irony, this dorm needed to be constructed. If you have been to Princeton's campus, it's a very beautiful, lush campus with trees and IMP. So I had the task to do it very quickly and with a very tight budget, because even Princeton during the oil crisis didn't have a lot of money. And so the idea of precast as something that could be off-site construction, where they work with standard elements. You see them, they're quite large elements that then got assembled very quickly in 14 months. Sort of organized around the trees. The project is 8 dorm buildings that sort of, in a somewhat structuralist manner, are sort of organized around the trees. And then they needed to be post-tensioned on site. And what you see here as, which might seem ornament, are actually the steel cables that pull the precast concrete elements in shape and have them cantilever over this corner. So that's my authentic contribution. And iconic is interesting, and I thought I should throw in some Amsterdam architecture. And this is very similar to the view I have from here, from this room I'm in, because the icon in some way suggests a, say, individualistic mastery, so to say, right? The hand of the author, somewhat disconnected from the city. And I thought it would be interesting to think of the iconic that is authored by a collective and that is not trying to distinguish itself from the rest of the city, but actually is part of the city itself. And so this corner building, the Dageraad, which was designed by 2 architects, actually Piet Kramer and Michel de Klerk in the 1920s, is part of a very large urban plan that Berlage made for Amsterdam. And he emphasized very much the importance of the corner as a way to help people navigate the city. So the iconic corner as a place of recognition. But this is a collective housing project. There's 278 homes built here, social housing, basically built in the 20s. And many of the sort of quite expressive architecture that was produced actually through collective collaborations between artists, sculptors, and architects. And so the idea of the icon or the iconic, not as something that is individualistic and removed from the city, but actually that is something that is inherently integrated in the city and is here to represent collective form rather than sort of individual genius. So then the ironic, and I was in Rotterdam the other day and I had to think again about this corner of the Kunsthal. The Kunsthal was built in 1994, and one of the main and one of the first sort of manifestations of Koolhaas's theory on cheapness, right, and the embrace, so to say, of commercial materials. It's obviously an ironic, say, reflection and reaction to the Neue Galerie by Mies, right? You see it on the beam, which is a fake beam, actually here. And I'm sure you've seen the building when you see it from the north or the southern facade. It's really sort of echoing the Neue Galerie by Mies. But here the whole building gets disassembled and sort of schlepped together from cheap materials. And this corner specifically is quite illustrative of his thinking. So rather than thinking of the building as sort of a static single moment, there's an interest in sort of folding time into the perception of the building. So the facades themselves are actually fragments almost of different buildings that get sort of assembled together. And his play here with the travertine and its sort of cheapness, the thinness of the material is obviously an ironic move, but a very important detail in this building, where both the game between thick and thin, between surface and depth are being played out. So for me, this building, which was a building that came out when I was a student in Delft, was very important because it I think very carefully plays that game between, say, intention, irony, illusion, right, and brings in a certain complexity, which I think is maybe lost a little bit in architecture now as well. The idea of using the history of architecture not just to sort of evoke nostalgia or sort of a whimsical irony, but also using irony as a critique, which I think is really the power of this building. And I wanted to end the 5 slides with maybe the sort of most authentic ironic, possibly, if not maybe iconic ironic even. I don't know if that's a combination that is allowed by you guys, Luca and Steph, but this is an architect maybe not so well known in the US, in Europe, James Wines of Site. Site means sculpture in the environment, and actually he's often being associated with postmodern architects, but he's very much more an artist who believes in working in sort of the real world as a whole. So and now associated very much with the environmental movement as well. So he was friends with like the Smithsons and sort of the 1970s land art movement in New York City. And then at some point got involved through two art collectors who were the owners of Best stores to design their big box retail. So Best is a catalog company where you get your stuff in a catalog, and then you would end up buying it in these big box retail stores around the country. And there's about 8 buildings that Site and James Wines have produced. This is the one in California, in Sacramento, in 1977, I believe. And all his projects are in a way quite ironic reflections on sort of the impermanence of our material orders and the fragility of the systems, even that of capitalism. So all his boxes in some way are on the on the verge of collapse or falling apart. And this one is particularly exciting. This entire, this is the front door of this building, and basically it sort of opens up. So this is a dynamic opening. This is the door at the opening, but basically the entire corner sort of moves out like a moat of a medieval castle. It will allow you into this wonderful world of American commerce. So those were my 5, and now in Eric Lapierre's style, I will show a project that we recently completed with a corner, and we can discuss, say, honesty and authenticity versus irony and fakeness. In some way, a very, say, almost classic modernist question of social housing for the worker. This is a project we recently indeed opened in León in Mexico, and it's one of the fastest growing cities in Mexico, mostly because there's a lot of the car industry that happened to be in Detroit moved here to Mexico, and so a lot of jobs moved to Mexico, and this city is attracting a lot of informal workers. And since they settle at the periphery of the city, where the mayor cannot bring security, not bring schools, not pick up the trash, not bring transportation, he asked us, and now after us a few others, to figure out how can we make higher density housing closer to the city center, but at the same sort of price point of the self-built homes at the periphery of the city. And so we were able to design 56 units around these 2 courtyards with all exterior circulation. And in order to make this possible, we could not afford machines. We had to work with the people. Machines were more expensive than people in this place, and it meant we had to design a block of exactly 17 kilos, which is the maximum amount that one worker is allowed to carry to make the facade. This is also the entire buildup of the facade. So speaking about honesty, there's none of the insulation or layering that happens. It's purely the single stone that is ultimately the wall of the project. And in that also, I think the hand, so to say, of the worker, the craft of the assembly actually reads through. We originally wanted to do this in precast panels, but actually the fact that we had to make this by hand became much more, it really gives it its texture and its quality. And then the units are all naturally ventilated, so there is light that comes through the 2 courtyards and has this cross ventilation with exterior walkways, giving people the opportunity to find multiple ways to their home. And 50, so this just opened, and we could spend the total of $2.5 million, so that's maybe 2 million euros for the entire construction of this project, which we're really excited about. So we're ending with this this corner solution. Thank you.
Beautiful. No, thank you very much, Florian, for talking about the importance of corners, and to conclude your presentation with the manifesto out of it, let's say. And it's I think it was maybe the first time. It never happened at school that someone copied from Eric Lapierre. I'm pretty sure, and did it better than him, let's say.
Don't tell him.
No. I'm kidding. I mean, it was really astonishing, and once again, we thank you all for participating in this and for offering your contribution. And it's really about generosity. We just want to underline this. So thank you very much, guys. And we invite you formally to take part to the next event that will happen this Monday, in which we will have AAP from Belgium, all about perspective, and then we will have Lorenzo Giordano and Studio Fabula. So again, we wish you a nice lunch, and thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you. That was fun.
Bye-bye. Bon appétit.
Bon appétit.